Reading from the Gospel according to St. Luke, the 18th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. Then Jesus told them a parable about their need to pray always and not lose heart. He said, in a certain city there was a judge who neither feared God nor had respect for people. In that city there was a widow who kept coming to him, saying, "Grant me justice against my opponent." For a while he refused, but later he said to himself, "Though I have no fear of God and no respect for anyone, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will grant her justice, so that she may not wear me out by continually coming." And the Lord said, "Listen to what the unjust judge says. And will not God grant justice to his chosen ones who cry to him day and night? Will he delay long in helping them? I tell you, he will quickly grant justice to them. And yet, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth?" The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. You may be seated. So I'll be honest, for a long time, I did not like this parable. Parable didn't make much sense to me for a long time. One of the most common questions that gets asked is, who's God in this parable? And one of the usual answer is, well, God is the unjust judge, right? I mean, God is a judge. I'm sorry, but that's just a terrible answer. Right? God as an unjust judge? No, I just can't buy that. That just does not seem to fit. Just because a God as a judge, I just can't buy that. It does not fit the mold of who God is. It's very unsatisfactory. Frankly, I think it's kind of lazy. I can't go with that. The other question is, where do I fit into this? Right? This is how we read things, is where do I fit into this? I don't know. For a long time, I had trouble with this. It's a parable that on the surface just doesn't make a whole lot of sense in our world. At least not in the circumstances that I've been used to. So what's going on in the story? I didn't understand it. But over time, I've come to appreciate this parable more and more. To the point where now I see this parable that may be the most real of all the parables that Jesus tells. The most practical that he tells in the sense of how real life works, even if we don't want to acknowledge that. Real in the sense of dealing with how people really work. At least how some people and some systems really work. There's no make-believe going on in this parable. Jesus just doesn't sugarcoat it here. This parable is fast becoming one of my favorites in a weird kind of way, because I'm starting to see people that I personally know who fit into the parable, especially in the role of the hero of this parable, the widow who just refuses to quit. So let's dive into this story. Jesus tells a parable. It's an opportunity to teach a lesson through a story. And he uses something very common, right? This is what parables are about, teaching using something very common. Something his hearers would all understand without any explanation. He talks about an unjust judge. Let that sink in for a minute. They all understand what an unjust judge is. Did you catch that? He says in a certain city, it doesn't matter what the city is. Because this is a situation that is all around them. It's a situation that is far too familiar for every one of the folks that are listening. He doesn't need to talk about everything that's around this judge, the entire system that is supporting this judge. They all know the story. They know the entire system is corrupt. There is no justice in this entire system that they are living in. It's the very premise of the story, and everyone knows it because they're living it every single day. Remember, they live in an empire where they are occupied by a foreign power, and the power dynamics are such that they are always
17 participants.
always on the losing side of every dispute. The system is rigged. It's always rigged, and it's always unjust. Every judge they face has no fear of their God and has no respect of the people, and in fact has contempt of the people. This parable isn't based in fiction. This parable is based in their daily lives. You want to know how to get what you want in such a system? Anybody want to guess? You pay a bribe. You pay a bribe. That's how you get what you want. Guess what? That's how a lot of the world still operates. You pay a bribe, because that's how most of the world still operates. We have to remember, right? We have to remember this. Get out of our system. And in a lot of places, even in our system, it's not all that great. Okay? Just remember this. But Jesus goes on, in that city, there was a widow. Plot twist. Jesus picks a person who is literally on the lowest end of society, a person who has no stature in society, the person who no one would listen to. She has no money. She's a widow. She has no money, so she can't bribe the official. She has no property, she has no rights, she has no nothing. All she has is a plea for justice. That's it, a plea for what's right. That's all she's got, nothing else. She has nothing else. We've heard these pleas for what's right before. They're the pleas when you've got nothing else. It's the plea that's repeated over and over again throughout history and time and place, in all sorts of time and place. Substitute the widow who's crying for justice in, you can substitute in a variety of different folks. Substitute in the black man who's crying out 11 times, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, while he's in a chokehold until he finally dies. Substitute in the people of Ukraine from a tyrant who attacks them because he just wants their land. Substitute in multiple other examples. It's the same thing. The widow cries out, justice, justice. She's got nothing else. She's crying justice, making an appeal of justice to a system that doesn't have any and doesn't care about justice. How do you think that's going to go? The unjust judge isn't swayed by the goodness of her argument, right? He says so right in the parable. I have no fear of God, no respect of anyone, yet this widow keeps bothering me. That's what he says, right? That's what he says. He isn't changed by her or her argument. He isn't convinced by her. He's worn down. He finally just quits. He doesn't care about what's right. His heart and mind are in bondage, and he cannot be set free. It's a part of our confession and forgiveness from time to time, right? We are in bondage to sin and cannot free ourselves. Here's the lesson. Here's where it gets real. You aren't going to change hearts and minds. We don't want to hear that. You aren't going to change hearts and minds. Boy, that sucks. We think we can change hearts and minds, especially those that are in bondage to injustice. You know why? It's not your job. It's not your job. You know whose job that is? God's job. Right. And even God isn't always successful in that. The unjust judge, his heart and mind isn't changed. Ooh, wow. That's a hard reality, right? It's a real hard reality. It's heartbreaking. It's really heartbreaking because we want people's hearts and minds to change. It's painful when people's hearts and minds don't change because we want what's best for them. But not everyone is gonna. They're not gonna. People can reject God. They have the freedom to do that. People aren't going to do the right thing just because it's the right thing. History is full of that. Just open up any history book or go on the internet and read stories. History is loaded with people who do not do the right thing just because it's the right thing. Like the unjust judge in the parable, some people are just too tied to systems that they think they benefit from and they will never change. There are too many things in place, too many feedback loops in place, too many pressures to keep the status quo in place, which is often unjust. Your job isn't to change all of that. More often than not, you can't. The lesson is this: have faith. Rely on God and be persistent with what you can do. There are things that you can do. This is not fairy tale good news. Jesus is being very real here. It's Jesus saying life is tough. There is injustice and you're going to face it. There are systems and institutions and organizations and people that have no interest in doing the right thing, and they will get in the way of doing the right thing. Again, history is loaded with this. And in spite of that, you keep doing the right thing. You see, God is the widow in the parable. God, like the widow, will pursue justice and won't quit in spite of the odds and the obstacles. And you and I are called to follow God's lead. There will be people who will do the exact opposite of what's supposed to happen. There'll be people who will stand in the way. Okay, fine, whatever. And you'll need to stand up over and over and over and over again, just like the widow, and say, justice, justice, justice. You'll need to stand up just like the widow and say, no, no, no. There's lots of people who aren't used to hearing no. And when you think you've said justice and no enough times, you'll need to say it more. and lots of people won't like it, and they won't be changed. Don't kid yourself in thinking that you're changing hearts and minds. You aren't. That's not the point. The widow in the parable wasn't concerned by this. It's about faith. It's about being faithful. The good news of this gospel seems a bit different this week. It's very real. The good news is Jesus saying to us, hang in there. Why do we need that? The good news of the gospel is don't shut up. Don't stop. Keep demanding justice. Don't play by the rules, especially when it's unjust. You're going to upset people. Jesus was crucified, for goodness sake. You think he upset people? Yeah. But eventually justice wins. Martin Luther King Jr. said the moral arc of the universe leans towards justice. That happens not because the unjust are changed, not because they're going to do the right thing, but because justice always prevails. It's because God doesn't quit. And God is persistent, just like the widow in the parable. When God is present, things get flipped, and the power dynamics aren't what they seem. The judge who seems like he's got all the power isn't really in charge. Justice happens in spite of the systems and obstacles that prevent it. As I mentioned earlier, this parable has become one of my favorites. And part of that is because I can now see people that I now know fit the character of the widow in the story. There are people in this congregation, people who are sitting in these pews. There are people in my life, friends in the community, people in the wider church, people I know in the wider world, people I see on a daily basis, people who work to feed the hungry, get people out of homelessness, people who care about the sick and dying, people that I don't even know their names that I come across, people who work to end racism and other injustices, people that I hear their stories about. There's a multitude of people who are the widow who just don't quit. People who do ministry in so many different ways, so many stories. People who are persistent, yelling justice, and have been yelling it for sometimes decades, and sometimes for just a short time. Young people and senior citizens and everybody in between, all of them taking on the role of the widow in the parable, all yelling justice in the midst of unjust judges and systems in a variety of ways, all standing with Jesus, whether they know it or not, who's cheering them on and standing with them, finding faith on earth. This parable is commonly called the parable of the widow and the unjust judge. But if I had my way, I'd rename it. I'd call it the parable of those who do not stop seeking justice. Thanks be to God for those who are willing to be a pain in the butt. Amen.